Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. We got some cutting to do today with some cherry logs that we brought into the yard, which we'll get over to here shortly. But normally before I go over to the wood yard, I spend time here in the garage sharpening the saws before I go. And it seems like every time I have a video where I'm cutting wood, I get questions about how I sharpen my saws. Now, I've never done a video on sharpening saws before, simply because there's so many great videos out there, namely the saw sharpening video by Buck and Billy Ray. I've tried everything. I've tried Dremel tools, I've tried round files, I've tried bench grinders, and of course the 2-in-1, which is what I use. So I'm going to briefly tell you this morning before we get cutting about how I do what I do and why I choose to do it this way. Some advantages and disadvantages for those of you who are struggling to sharpen your own saws, and hopefully this might help somebody, so stick around. So I'm just going to start off this morning showing you what I do, and that's the round file. Now, this is by no means an instructional video. This is just showing you what I do and what seems to work for me. The reason I like the 2-in-1 is because it's 2-in-1, right? It does the tooth and the raker at the same time. Also, what I like about it is it gives you a guide to what angle you should be on. Now, I've sharpened saws successfully with a round file before, but you're constantly worried about keeping the angle right on the saw. So you have the round file here, and normally once you get good at it, you can do it fairly well, but you want to have the consistent angle on every single tooth. And with the 2-in-1, what you get here is you have a guide to start. So as long as you start on the tooth with this line parallel to the bar, you do your stroke and you finish with this line parallel to the bar, then you know you're pretty much on the correct angle all the way through. The only other thing you have to worry about is up and down. You want to keep it as perpendicular to the saw as you can, 90 degrees from the bar to the bottom of the 2-in-1. So I'm probably wrong for doing it the way I do it, but I always take about 5 strokes, even if the saw just needs touched up. You can probably do it in 2 or 3 strokes, but I always do 5, and it always works well. Now, do I take some life out of the tooth? Absolutely, I probably do. But as I'm sharpening, I'm not only pushing back into the gullet of the tooth, but I'm also applying some down pressure to the flat file to make sure that we get the raker as well. Now, I always get these comments on my videos because people are actually being complimentary of how well my saw cuts. There's one thing about cutting with a sharp saw versus a dull saw, and that is sharp saws have more fun. Sharp chains have more fun. Now, not only is it more dangerous to cut with a dull chainsaw, but it also gets frustrating. You start having to muscle the saw, wrench on the saw, makes the saw run hotter, and it takes longer. So I always say when you get to a point where you're fighting your saw or you're having to muscle your saw, it's time to stop and take a minute and just put a new edge on your chain. Now, the Dremel tools, they work well. I've done that before. But the problem with a Dremel tool is that you have to be very careful not to get the tooth too hot, because if you get the tooth hot, it takes the temper out of it, and although your chain will be sharp, it won't stay sharp for as long. So the bench grinder, on the other hand, it gets the top plate sharp, but it doesn't really get the gullet, as Billy Ray says. So this is how I sharpen my saw, and as you can see here, as we get to the end, you see this tooth coming up that has the top plate colored red. I always keep a Sharpie here. That way I know where I started and where I need to stop. That's one side done. So I've got the saw turned around here, and inevitably we're all either right-handed or left-handed. So we all have a side of sharpening a chain that we're better at than the other. And you really have to play with it to find your positioning and how you want to set yourself up to sharpen the side that you're less comfortable with. So when I sharpen this side of the saw, if you notice, the saw is setting back in the vise a little further. The power head of the saw is not actually right up on the vise, and that's because if you have a longer bar, the longer your bar gets extended out past the edge of the vise, the more flex you're going to have when you apply the pressure to sharpen the tooth. And when that bar starts flexing, you start getting some chatter on, you know, the 2-in-1 will start chattering because the bars want to flex and bounce and return to its original shape. So if you notice, I don't have a whole lot of the bar sticking out on this side of the vise, and that keeps it a little bit more rigid for me. That's just something that seems to work better for me in particular, and it might help you. All right, we're gonna get this finished up, cut some cherry logs, get this saw fired up and get to work. So here's the cherry logs I want to get done today. There's about 12 or 15 logs laying here. They're kind of in the way because I want to process some more bundle wood. Got some pretty good size ash logs that I brought in that are barkless, really dry. Get that split up so it's ready for bundles. So this is kind of the area that I do my bundle work in, right in front of the axis. And these cherry logs I need to get cut and split because I keep those separated over there in totes. Just the cherry is the only species I separate. But you can see that I was chipping away at this pile over here, but I brought another load of logs in this week. So that pile is right back to where we started. But anyway, we'll fire up the 500i, get our chaps on, and rip through these cherry logs here real quick. See how well the saw cuts. Well, we made some pretty quick work of that. The 500i was running good. Chain was nice and sharp. I ran that same chain the entire time, cutting all those logs. I didn't stop and touch up. It was about a tank and a half of fuel. And it was still cutting good when I got done. But I think probably when it's time to refuel the saw the next time, we'd be ready for a touch-up. So we got a really good pile of nice cherry rounds here. I'll show you in a minute, but I really, I like to cut out the crotches and the nasty pieces and the stuff that's not going to make good looking firewood. I really didn't have to cut much of anything out at all on these logs. Everything was pretty straight. So that's always nice. And if you're wondering, cherry, yes, cherry is Stihl. my favorite firewood to process. Good straight cherry, that is. If nothing else, the smell is just pleasant to cut. So I'm gonna finish stacking these last few rounds here, and I'll show you what we ended up with and how much scraps we have left. All right, so here's how we ended up. Like I said, they're really straight, nice rounds, so they'll split easy, make good looking firewood. Got the log lift on the axis loaded up, ready for its first round, and all this cherry will be split here real soon. I would go ahead and split it today, but I do have a job to go to with the grapple truck. We've got some big white oak trees coming down. It's going to have some saw logs on it, so those saw logs have got to get to the mill today. And speaking of the scraps and the cookies, this is all we ended up with right here. There's one little big knot there that was in a crotch. The rest are all just basically the cutoffs or the butt log where they cut the notch in the tree to drop it. So not much scraps at all. Real clean load there, and we're ready to split. So that's going to be it. I'm going to head out of here and go get the truck warmed up and get up to the job site to get those logs out. I hope maybe the beginning of this video, sharpening the saw, might have showed you something different that you don't do, or help somebody out that's just getting going, trying to sharpen their own chains. So that was kind of the point there at the beginning. We got that load cut up and progress. So I hope to see you all back here next week, Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. Until then, I hope you all have a great one. Take care, everybody.